It's Create Day, my friends. Welcome back to another video. Today I am transforming a thrifted find and a Dollar Tree wood sign into this whimsical decor item for Valentine's Day and beyond. Let's get started. First up is this wood sign that I picked up at the thrift store. It's really sturdy and in pretty good shape, so I'm just going to remove all the stickers and those staples on the back and then give it a really good sanding to remove as much of that design on the front as I can. I'm also using this sign from Dollar Tree, and it's going to get a good sanding as well. There's a lot of glitter on the front. Using Dixie Belle's chalk mineral paint in the color Buttercream, I applied 2 coats to the board. I will leave a list of the products I used in this video down in the description box below, and I will provide affiliate links wherever possible. With IOD's La Campagne stamp, I'm going to add a faint floral background onto the board. I'm using Archival ink in the color Pebble Beach. I laid out my stamps over the heart because that will be covering that section of the board, and then press down my stamp mount to pick up those pieces and get them inked up. A stencil would work really well for this also, but I have a lot more stamps than I do stencils, so I am using this. I'm inking this up, and then I'm going to take a piece of just plain copy paper and lightly touch over the tops of that to make sure I get off any excess ink. I did not want a really dark impression, so I'm just lightly taking off any excess, and then I can go ahead and stamp that onto my board. In fact, it was a little lighter than I wanted, but in the end I would rather have it lighter than too dark. So it turned out just fine. And I just press down, making sure I get coverage on all of those areas, and then I can pull that up. And I decided that there were a few spots I wanted to fill in, so I just took an individual stamp on a different little stamp mount and just filled in those areas. With my antiquing wax, I'm going to go around the edge of the board, almost like a stain. I'm going to brush this on there and then wipe it back with a baby wipe. And I did end up adding a little bit of water to this. It was pretty thick, and I realized that it just needed to flow a little better. So just a few little spritzes of water on there. And I was able to continue just doing this around the entire perimeter of the board. So now for the heart, I wanted to cover this in Dropcloth. So I folded a piece in half, and I'm just tracing around that heart. I will pin those 2 pieces together so that I can cut them both out at once without it shifting around on me. And I'm cutting outside of that line about a 1/2 inch. I need some extra hanging over for the way that I want to do this. I'm going to glue down 1 piece of the cutout drop cloth onto the back of the heart. Actually, I guess this was the original front of the heart, which is now going to be the back of the heart. I'm watering down my Mod Podge just a little bit to help it flow easier onto here. It can, tend to be pretty thick, and I just wanted it to be able to brush on a little easier. And I'm covering that whole board, and then I can put that onto the top of the drop cloth, press it down, smooth it out, and then set it aside to dry. I had this really pretty lace that I thought would look nice on here with that scalloped edge, just kind of draped across half the heart. So I just laid that out there and trimmed it up. And I'm going to attach this with some Fabri-Tac glue. I'm folding back the lace so that I can apply the glue to the lace instead of to the drop cloth, trying to keep the glue on the thicker parts of the lace, since the meshy stuff, it just kind of comes right through and, makes a bit of a mess. So I'm trying to keep it on those thicker parts, and I had to get it on some of the thinner parts as well in order for it to adhere. But you can just take a paper towel and dab up the excess on, like by dabbing it on top, so that you don't have glue like seeping out through the little thin mesh places. And now here's where I had some of the edges didn't completely adhere with the Mod Podge, so I'm fixing that with the Fabri-Tac glue. And if you don't have this glue in your arsenal, you really need to if you do this type of crafting. It is wonderful. It sticks really well. I use it all the time, and I will leave a link for it in the description box. Now I'm attaching the top to the bottom section there. I'm going around the edge of the heart board and then smoothing that out, and I will set it aside to dry. Now it's time to move on to making some castings. I'm using my amazing resin. There will be a link for that in the description box as well. It's a half and half, part A and part B. Mix it up, and in 10 minutes you've got castings ready to go. And they always turn out so nice. This is IOD's Toadstool Mould. And if you've been watching me for any length of time, you know I like to use a lot of air dry clay, but for this project, I really think resin is the way to go. Time for paint, so I'm going to start with Folk Arts Barnwood and give all of these a base coat of that front and back. For the next step in the painting process, I grabbed a bunch of earthy tones. I have honeycomb, yellow ochre, and woodsy smoke. I don't end up using the yellow ochre though. I also have light mocha, espresso, and cinnamon. And then there's a couple of other colors I will be adding in as I go through this and figure out what it is I need to do. I tend to be a little bit of a free-spirited painter when it comes to this kind of project. So I am going to be mixing these colors on the piece as I go, blending them. I'm not going to wait for them to dry. I'm just going to blend them together to get the look that I want. So I'm starting out with the espresso brown, and then I'm going in with that, I think that might be, it's either honeycomb or cinnamon. I'm not sure. Sorry. Oh, it's cinnamon. Yeah, I have the colors lined. I don't even pay attention to what I do. I have those colors lined up corresponding with the colors on the mat. Okay, so anyway, back to, gosh. So now I'm mixing in some honeycomb, and I'll wipe off my brush in between colors, but that's it. Like, I'm just blending. So now some woodsy smoke. And, for something that, like a toadstool that has all those just varying colors in it, to me, this is how I like doing it. If it's not your thing, you can paint them however you want. This is just for inspiration, which is what I always hope to bring to you. So I'm just glad you'll bear with me and my messiness. My hands are a complete mess by the time I'm done. So anyway, here's medium brown is one that I added in that I hadn't planned on using. So I'm going to add some of that in there. And then I will set that one aside to let it start drying, and I can start on the next casting. And I'll be doing the same process on all of them. Not making them all exactly the same, but using, the same colors, maybe in uh, different different amounts of the color. Like on this one, um, I think I use a little more of the browns and less of the golds. Make them all a little bit unique, but all somewhat similar at the same time. Once those were dry, I am going to do some dry brushing here with light mocha. So I'm getting a little bit of paint on my brush and then offloading most of it onto a paper towel and then just lightly brushing that over all the raised details. It just helps to give it that more natural kind of highlighted look that you would see in nature. And I ended up doing, like I did this on all of them, and then they all kind of look the same. And I felt like it was a little bit too much of the light. So I did go in with another color called Mocha right here. And I just lightly applied that to some of the areas. I didn't like do the whole thing, and I'm still doing the dry brushing, but just a little bit in certain areas just so it wasn't so just the same. Like I just felt like that dry brushing needed a little something extra to it to make them all look more natural. So now, I don't know if you've ever had this problem with your resin castings. I guess I didn't fill it quite full enough, and I have that little raised lip around the edges. So I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and just holding it flush with the surface of the back side of that casting, I can just scrape off that little lip around there, and then that way this will glue onto my project much better than having that raised section all around the outside. Just make sure you keep that blade moving away from your hand and not towards it. So now it's time to stuff the heart. I've just got some polyfill that I had on hand from like an old stuffed animal or something. And I'm just going to stuff this in there just like if you were making a pillow. I'm using a clay tool there, but that was not long enough, so I switched out to a dowel rod. I'm going to make sure I get this nice and full, and then I can glue down that edge that I'm using to put the polyfill through. I'm using Fabri-Tac glue to seal up that edge. So now with that done, here's why I wanted the extra fabric. I am gluing around the edge of that heart, attaching those two pieces of drop cloth together so that they will be closed around that outer edge of the heart. I don't want that to show because I'm going to trim this back and then kind of have a rough edge that I can distress. So that's why I had the extra. Now I'm going to make the pocket that goes across the front of the heart. So I have actually like the heart shape cut out, and I just cut it in half. And I'm folding over that top, gluing it down with hot glue so that I can fold it over again and make like a little cuff that goes across the front of the pocket. So that way it has a nice finished edge. I'm using that same lace that I used on the front of the heart. I am putting the scalloped edge down across that little finished edge cuff that I made. The rest of the lace is on the back side of this. I didn't want it all over the front. I just felt like that would be too much. So now I'm just putting my Fabri-Tac glue on there. And here's where I did just apply it all over. And so I'm dabbing it off with a paper towel, the excess that comes through the little tiny mesh parts. And I'm going to go ahead and glue that, the rest of that lace on the back side of that pocket so that it just is more finished. Like you're not going to see all the way down in there to the bottom, but I wanted it to be finished. So now here's where I'm trimming off that excess around. Not completely up to the wood of that sign. I'm leaving just a little bit extra so that I can kind of fray it out and distress it. So I don't know, like maybe a quarter of an inch is left between the edge of the fabric and that board. And so here's where I'm taking my scissors and I'm rubbing it across that seam to get those edges nice and frayed out so that I can distress it with my Archival ink in the color Pebble Beach. I'm using a little sponge applicator for this, with the exception of right in there at the top of the heart. It doesn't reach in there, and I tried using my ink pad and even it wouldn't go all the way in there, so I ended up just using my finger for that. See, I'm trying, but it's not working. So finger to the rescue. So I was able to go ahead and distress all the way around the edges of this heart. So now it's time to apply the pocket to the front of the heart. I am laying this on here and then clipping it into place just to see where exactly I want this to be. That way I can turn it over and see if all my edges on the bottom, if I have enough room to fold it up underneath there. Just trying to figure out the proper placement for this. And once I do that, I can go ahead and staple this to the back of the board to secure it into place. So once I was sure I had it where I wanted to, I went ahead and stapled the sides, the top sides first, then flipped it over, did a double check, and then went ahead and flipped it back over and finished stapling down the sides to secure this into place. I used my Fabri-Tac glue to go ahead and secure any of the loose flaps left over from where I did the stapling, just so it would have a nice flat finish on the back. So now we are on to making an oversized tag for this project. It's going to go inside that pocket. This is just a standard cardstock tag, and I'm painting it in the color Barnwood. It will curl up on you, but when you paint the other side, it will lay back down flat, so don't worry about that. When the paint was dry, I'm using IOD's transfer from the Fairy Merry Christmas, and no, not all of these are just Christmas. This one is absolutely gorgeous and works perfectly for this project. I remove the backing, lay this on top of my tag, and it's a little bit bigger, as far as width, but that's fine. I'm going to wrap around the parts that stick, and the parts that don't, that's fine too. Using the transfer tool, I just get this all burnished on there, and then I can burnish it with that transfer sheet. And like I said, around the edges, anything that was still on there, I can just bend over like that mushroom right there. Just bend it over to the back, burnish all those little edges, and then I'm going to go ahead and antique the edges of this with that Archival ink in the color Pebble Beach. I'm reestablishing the hole, just poking through with my scissors, and then I get a pencil, and there you go. Just get that all smoothed out the way it should be. Using the Archival ink Pebble Beach around the edges, and then I will also take my little sponge applicator and rub a little bit of that up onto the front, just around the edges, onto the front of that tag. These transfers are just so beautiful. I absolutely love them. Time to glue in our mushrooms. I'm using Fabri-Tac glue for this. I kind of laid them in there the way I thought I would want them to be first, and then I'm picking them up one by one and gluing them in. And even though this is on a pillowed surface, these stuck just fine. I have no concern about them coming loose or anything. It turned out really well. I do add a little bit of hot glue for the ones that I'm layering on top of the other mushrooms. So I get the Fabri-Tac glue on the part that touches the fabric, and then I add the hot glue for the part that touches the other mushroom. Now for some mosses. I'm starting with Spanish moss to tuck down in as kind of like a filler down into the bottom part of that pocket. And then I will be able to add some colorful mosses on top of all that. But first I want to secure my little oversized tag, just using a little bit of hot glue on the bottom and kind of up that center section a little bit, so that it will just stay in place. It doesn't have to be completely glued down flat. The top can remain unglued, but I just wanted enough on there that it would stay in place. Then I can go ahead and add the Spanish moss down underneath that. If I had put that in there first, it would have gotten hung up on it and not fit in there properly. So once I have that in there, I can start with these little pieces of, I think it's supposed to be eucalyptus. I don't know, I just thought they would look nice in here. So I trim them up into short little pieces and attach those with some hot glue. And then after that, I will start adding the mosses. I've got two different types of moss I want to use on this. I'm starting with that really spongy, kind of yellowish colored moss. I don't know what it's called, but it's really spongy, and I thought that would be a good base to put down in there. And then adding the darker green, kind of like reindeer moss in certain little areas over that. I just wanted to get like a nice combination of the two different mosses, in addition to a little tiny bit of that Spanish moss that actually shows through. Next up, I'm going to make a bow. I'm using that same lace for some of this, and I'm using a rotary cutter and a cutting mat I found that for this kind of lace, to cut it with scissors is really hard, like it doesn't cut straight. So I found that just holding a ruler down and running that rotary cutter is a game changer. So if I can find a link for those, I will leave them in the description box. Now each of these pieces, and I don't know, I think they're maybe 16 inches long. It just depends on the size of bow you want. I've got the ticking stripe ribbon, I've got the lace, and some tea towel, just ripped tea towel. And I have 6 pieces of each, and I'm going to layer these tea towel, lace, and ribbon. And then I'm going to do the same going the opposite way. Tea towel, lace, and ribbon. And I'm just going to keep layering those in that set of 3. Normally this kind of a bow you wouldn't do like 3 layers and then crisscross. You'd go crisscross like each layer. But I'm just doing it differently because I wanted those 3 layers all kind of lined up together for this. I'm experimenting. I don't know. I'm horrible at bow making, so don't take advice from me on how to do that. Like, I'm horrible. I need to step my game up in that area. So anyway, I've got a piece of floral wire here that I'm going to just cinch around that middle section to secure these pieces together, and then attempt to like kind of spread them out after the fact, just kind of like fluff it all out. And so yeah, see how you can just kind of fluff it all out, but then I wrap that center and it kind of brings them all back in. So whatever. I cut another piece of that striped ribbon to cover that center portion with. And I end up not being happy with the way that looks, so I changed that at the very end. Just, you know, personal preference. Do whatever you like. I don't like my bows, so I'm never happy with them. So now I am dovetailing. It's just the ribbon. I'm not going to do the tea towel or the lace. I'm just going to dovetail all the little ribbon ends. And then I will attach this with some hot glue to the front of the pocket. I'm taking a piece of that torn tea towel and just threading it through the hole in my little tag, pulling it back up, and then I will tie a knot in the top of that and trim off the ends. I'm attaching these wood craft cubes from the Dollar Tree with E6000 glue to my board so that I can place the heart on top of these, and it will be a raised heart on top of this board. It was at this point, however, that I realized I had not sealed this piece. Since I have chalk paint on there, it needed to be sealed. So I went in with my Select Seal matte sealer, just making sure that I was careful around those freshly glued on wood cubes. And so then this piece was good to go. And now I can glue on my heart. I'm going to use E6000 for this as well. I'm just making sure that I have the placement right and it's where I want to be. And then I can set it aside and let it dry. Now to fix that bow, I'm using Archival ink in the color Pebble Beach and my little brush applicator that I picked up from Hobby Lobby to put some of this ink around the edges of my little paper flower that also came from Hobby Lobby. I cut out a piece of each of the lace, the tea towel, and the drop cloth, and then just glued them together in the center with my Fabri-Tac glue. And then I can attach the flower to that, and I'm not gluing it down yet, but I'm just holding it on there so that I can cut around in kind of a random petal shape, or like to follow the shape of the flower, so that now I have a nice like little layering of fabric underneath this to attach that to the middle of the bow. When I had that cut out to my liking, I attached the flower to the fabric with the Fabri-Tac glue, just in the center so that those little layers of fabric will still kind of spread out. Now I have these little pieces of white, tiny white florals from a pick that I just cut off into small pieces just to add a little bit of white to that moss. And lastly, I go ahead and attach this paper flower with my Fabri-Tac glue to the center of that bow, and that completes this project. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you find my content useful and will like and subscribe if you haven't already. But more importantly, I hope I've inspired you to go create something. See you next time.